Hi, I'm Shannon and I'm a binge eating and intuitive eating coach. In this video, we're going to be talking about making peace with food. How you can go from feeling out of control around certain foods to being able to keep them in your house without even thinking about it. So one of the key principles with intuitive eating is making peace with food. And what this means is largely taking away the morality that certain foods have, like good foods and bad foods, thinking about foods in these extreme type of ways. Part of making peace with food is also giving yourself unconditional permission to eat, which can feel really scary and overwhelming when you first hear about this concept. So we're gonna dive into that today and how to make it a little less scary and overwhelming. Many people, especially those with binge eating, fear giving themselves unconditional permission to eat. It's not uncommon to feel like, well, if I give myself unconditional permission to eat, all I'm gonna be eating are my forbidden foods, like the ones that I don't tend to keep in the house, right? Or if I do, I binge on them almost instantly. And at first, this does feel true for some people. You will find yourself really gravitating towards those forbidden foods more so than a variety of food. But the good news is this doesn't last forever. The good news is this is an important part of the process. So if you're experiencing this or this happens to you, know that you're not doing it wrong. This desire to eat all of the once forbidden foods can come up really, really easily, and it's totally a normal part of the intuitive eating process. And part of the reason this happens is because you're allowing yourself to have what was once restricted. They felt off limits, you didn't have them regularly, and now your body is saying, well, get it in while we can. I want this food. I love and enjoy this food, fearing that soon it will be taken away. So through habituation with food, you'll find yourself gravitating less towards the forbidden foods and more towards a variety of foods. And you might even find that some of those forbidden foods you actually didn't enjoy as much as you nearly thought that you did. And so it's all about finding that peace with the food and removing the morality from it so that a nectarine has the same emotional pull as gummy candy, for example. So what exactly is habituation? Habituation is a phenomenon that explains why we quickly adapt to repeated situations or experiences. For example, when you first download a new app and you're getting notifications and you notice all of them all of the time, and then with time you are ignoring them, you don't really think about them, and then they just passively show up and you barely acknowledge them. Well, this is kind of a part of habituation where you're becoming used to getting those notifications, those signals, and with time, they draw less and less of your attention. Habituation is also why leftovers don't taste as good like day 2 or day 3 after, because you're used to having and eating the same thing, and so it loses its appeal or its pull. There's quite a lot of research on food habituation. Scientists describe food habituation as a form of neurobiological learning in which repeated eating of the same food causes a decrease in behavioral and physiologic responses. So the fears that are coming up for you when you think about habituation with your forbidden foods, right, where we're starting to explore them and eat them more regularly, the fears that might be coming up for you, one of them I addressed earlier, but that fear of I'm never going to be able to stop eating this food. That feeling of out of control is a normal response to deprivation. So that feeling of loss of control is going to diminish over time over these foods, and that's the purpose of habituation. I encourage you to think of habituation as a really brave step towards healing your relationship with food, rather than viewing it as this really challenging, horrible process. And again, you may experience overeating at first, and this is totally normal and part of the experience. So I want to clarify a little bit about the unconditional permission to eat before we dive in how exactly to do the habituation process. This is from the Intuitive Eating book, and it reads, unconditional permission to eat is not about choosing to overeat. It's about staying connected to the eating experience, taste, satisfaction, satiety. Initially, many people fear that if they allowed themselves to eat ice cream, for example, they would never stop and gain a tremendous amount of weight. But guess what? It gets really boring to eat ice cream every day for every meal. The surprising truth for many people is that it feels better to eat healthier meals most of the time. And when you remove the forbidden food factor, these foods are no longer eaten in excess. So you may be also wondering a little bit about food addiction here, and I'm definitely gonna make a whole video on food addiction. But basically what's important to know is that there is no clear evidence that food addiction exists. And actually the research that has been done on food addiction does not take into account the factors of deprivation, which we know to be a large contributing factor to overeating. So that is just one thing to consider when it comes to food addiction. And the power of habituation really goes to show that it's possible to eat these forbidden foods in a comfortable amount. Okay, so now that you know all the background, let's jump into actually how to implement habituation. So the first thing you should do is make a list of all your forbidden foods. These are the foods that you generally restrict, stay away from, feel uncomfortable having in your house, and beat yourself up for eating. For most people, this list includes foods like takeout, sweets, and chips, but your unique list might look different. Pick a food from the forbidden food list. You don't have to start with the one you fear the most if that feels like it's too much. And that's a really important caveat here, that this exercise can be really challenging. And so if it feels like too much too soon, take a step back, reevaluate, and potentially come back to it later. I don't want you to push yourself if you don't feel ready to do this, but it can be a really healing step. You're gonna stock your home with that food and make sure you purchase more than you can eat in one sitting, even if it's a binge. So immediately restock if you run out, and try your best to keep that food on hand. Obviously, some food, it's easier to do that than others, depending on perishability and whatnot. And then anytime you want to eat that food, go ahead and have that food. Try your best to remember you don't need to feel guilty or make up for it, and you can always have more later if you want. So to remind you, at first you may find yourself eating a lot of that one type of food, but after days of this process, the food starts to lose its appeal through habituation. Our goal here isn't to burn you out on the food, but rather to make it known to your body and mind that there isn't anything off limits about it. You won't have to do this with every item on your list, as your body will learn all foods are equal. However, you should continue doing this with at least 2 to 3 foods, or until you feel like you truly aren't restricting. So this process can feel scary, and that's totally understandable. I want to reiterate that. Whatever feelings you're feeling are valid. I encourage you to start with just one food at a time. And it might be helpful to find a coach, preferably someone who's gone through the intuitive eating training as I have, to help guide you through this process. If you're interested in our coaching program, I'll leave the link in the description below where you can learn more. So now that you know a bit about habituation, making peace with food, and the process to do this, you may be thinking, okay, well, this works for other people, but this is not going to work for people with binge eating. Well, the good news is there have been multiple studies that have shown that this is effective for people with binge eating. I'll link 2 of them below. And speaking from personal experience, habituation has absolutely changed my life. So I hope that this video was helpful, that it gave you a couple of new things to think about. Well, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.